A lot of, education is an investment, but there are certainly bad investments out there. And you've got to actually
Look at school.
yeah, you've got to do the cost and benefit analysis, right? And so if you're going to invest in some kind of NFT or crypto, something, it really has no value on the back end except, hope. Then the same is with an education that, it may be a passion, but it does not be paying back, after the fact. And then there are, concrete ways of actually measuring what the educations could be worth to you.
It's fascinating. Take a place like Google. Google is renowned for having probably the most difficult interview process kind of out there. It's renowned for it. I had a company previously, I made parts for Apple and then sold that company. And I had worked closely with a lot of the mobile team at Google and was looking at a job with them. And my interview process was 6 months. I think I had something like 14 different interviews and no one there cared where I went to college. And in fact, the lead person who was kind of managing my whole process was a high school dropout. And now he was fairly high up at Google. They do not care. They don't care what your college is. They don't care what your degrees are. What they care about is how you think. And the fascinating thing about the interview, and one of the questions that kind of sticks out in my mind is they would ask questions like, how many trains are required in France to get everyone to work? And that's not a question you can study for, right? And no one knows that, right? No, I don't know how many trains are in France. I don't know how many employees need to get to work. And so what you have to do is sit there and you go through and they look at your thought process. So you're like, okay, what's the population of France? Okay, well, France is roughly geographically, the size of half of California. And, California has X amount of people. So let's say France has, 20 million people. What percentage of those people commute to work? Okay, with an unemployment rate that's roughly, 10%. That means 80% of those 20 million have a job. How many take a train to work? It's probably a much higher percentage than those in the US because there's much more access to trains in France. And you go through this thought process and they don't care if you actually get the number of trains right. What they care about is how are you thinking about it? Are you thinking through how many people fit on a train? Are you thinking through how many people would use a train every day? How many geographic miles of train track are in France? And these are answers that, yes, you could Google, but nobody really has the knowledge of. And those are the kind of questions they ask because they want to see how you think. They don't look at you and go, oh, do you have an MBA? Oh, can you write this line of code? So anyway, I just think it's really fascinating that some of the most successful companies in the world don't care about your education. They care about how you think. The same is true of Tesla, SpaceX. They're hiring people that are high school dropouts that have a passion for something and know how to think critically. And so what I would argue is do something that you're passionate about, learn about it, do things that are hard, do things you don't like doing, but learn. And the once you have skills in a variety of disciplines and you know how to critically think, you are set up to be successful regardless of what pieces of paper you have.
And those more and more companies I've been hearing, these corporations are stepping away from the 4-year degree or master's or post bachelor's degree requirements just because of that. Is because as the cost of universities inflate and that degree, the value of the degree deflates. And
it's also not even, they grade inflate now. So when I was in school, I started out in mechanical engineering at Berkeley. And when one of my first classes talk about feeling meek and insignificant, there were probably 2,000 or 3,000 people in this auditorium. And the professor starts out and he says, look, this was back when we had SATs and you had 800 for math, 800 for verbal, 1,600 was a perfect score.
Mm-hmm.
And the professor starts out and says, look around you because we grade on the curve. That means 50% of the people in this auditorium will no longer be students at Cal Berkeley by the end of this semester. And keep in mind as well that we only have 10% of the people in this room that did not score an 800 on their math SAT. So understand what you're walking into. So I had a room of thousands of people that are the best math minds in the world. And they're saying half of you are not only not going to pass, but you're gone. You no longer have a spot in this class or in this university. And so, A, talk about terrifying you, but B, that wouldn't happen now. Now, if you get into Harvard, I think the average grade point at Harvard's like, and obviously someone I'm sure will correct this, but it's like a 4.1. The average is over an A. It's obscene. Back when I graduated from Cal, I think if you graduated Cal with a 3.0 or above, that was good.
Mm-hmm.
And now everyone graduates with a 4 point. So not only do you have something that you paid a lot of money for, but the reason companies don't put any merit in it is because you didn't do anything for it. If you have a pulse, you get a 4.0. And the reason you get the 4.0 is because you paid $500,000 for it. And the school's not going to let you pay $500,000 and flunk out. So it's not worth the paper it's printed on.
So it's no longer meritocracy. It's not.
Exactly.
So not only is the price, the cost inflating, but it's being devalued in other ways. Because it's just meaningless paper. And really expensive, meaningless paper. But there was also something you mentioned before about, when you went to school and you went to a school full of, the alpha, the winners, and being, among everybody who was used to winning, and then how that is discouraging.
Yeah.
Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point because it's obvious once someone brings it up, but it's something that is not something that I think necessarily would be top of mind if you didn't know about it. So, sorry, I lost my train of thought here for a second. Sorry, refresh me on the question one more time. I just literally got over COVID last week, so I got a bit of brain fog going.
Well, it was going into a place where it was everybody is used to winning.
Oh yeah. So thank you, and hopefully we can edit my complete brain fog out. But what happens is, and I think you experience this in sports as well. I was an athlete at Cal, and I think a sports analogy is a really good way to kind of quantify this. And that is my first day, kind of on the field at Cal. I was playing rugby at the time, and Cal has one of the best teams in the country. And the athletes there, to give you an idea of the athletes, we had, I think, 5 folks from our team drafted to the NFL that didn't play football. So, and then they played in the NFL for years. So, to give you an idea of the quality of the athletes. So there was a guy that I was going against that ended up being drafted as a fullback for the Minnesota Vikings. So here I am, a freshman, at Cal, 18 years old, and I get sent out one-on-one against this guy, and I think I'm going to drop him like I dropped people in high school. And I went to make a full hit, and not only did I half miss him, but he didn't even notice that it was like a mosquito. I bounced right off. And immediately, in my brain, I'm sitting there going, that dude's twice my size, and now I realize he's faster, and this whole game is played at a level that my brain can't even comprehend. And eventually you kind of start to make those changes, or you realize that it's not for you, and you crumble. And so I think that what happens when you send your student or your child to a university that is, for example, that math class, I felt like I was going to fail. And I ended up going into engineering, and I have successful companies designing products and engineering products. And I had a love of mechanical engineering, but it made me feel like I was stupid, because instead of going to a school and graduating with an engineering degree at a school where I would have been one of the top students, instead, if you go to, an MIT, a Caltech, one of these types of schools where it's the best of the best, you have people that are in the top 1,000 in the world of that discipline, but there's somebody who graduated last in their math class at MIT, and they're way smarter than me, and they're way smarter than all of us, but they still graduated last at MIT. So they feel like a complete failure. And maybe they had a passion for math growing up, and it was what made their, to sound cheesy, but it's what completed their passion and their soul. And now they're sitting there going around like, well, I'm a failure because I came in dead last in my math class. So a lot of them will drop out and they won't do math. They won't become that professor. They won't continue to work on whatever that discipline was. And I think Malcolm Gladwell, who I'm a huge fan of, said it really succinctly. He said, don't send your student or your child to a university. If they're great at music, don't send them to Juilliard, where they're going to feel like they suck and they'll probably lose their love of music because they're insecure. Send them someplace where they can compete against who they're going to be competing with in the real world, and then see how they do. And they won't lose their passion for it, because I think we're doing a disservice to people who are very good at what they do. And I came very close to never doing engineering and never building products for a living. And I think that that's what I'm good at, and that's what my passion is. And going to Berkeley, competing against the best of the best, was the worst thing I could have done.
It's also, it's also a great plan for a more affordable education, like a 4-year degree. Is go somewhere, do a community college, do maybe one of the smaller state schools, and get a good education, hone those skills, maybe do post-grad at one of the bigger names, bigger programs.
Absolutely. You can save yourself a ton of money doing that too. If you want to get a degree, go to JC for 3 years. It's also easier to get into schools.
Right.
I had so many friends that I went to school with where they went to a JC for 3 years, transferred to Berkeley for the last 2, and their degree still said Berkeley on it. And they paid, back then even less. But it's also, in that JC, you can decide whether or not this really is something you love, because you're not enjoying it because you think you're bad at it. You're actually seeing, okay, I'm against a bunch of folks in JC. I'm going to see how I actually do, because these are the folks that I'm actually competing against in the world. So, going back to that sports analogy, the person who loses their first 100-meter race at the Olympics is still unbelievably fast. They're one of the fastest 20 people in the world, but do they feel good? No, they feel like